and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
Welcome to Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider the news of the day. Let's begin with the kerfuffle around Ponggol festivities in schools. So today there was a circular issued by the Education Ministry which referred to a declaration by the Sharia panel at JAKIM, which is the Department of Islamic Development Malaysia. Now, the declaration stated that since Ponggol is a religious celebration of the Hindu community, it is therefore haram for Muslims to join in Ponggol festivities, quote, especially the event where milk rice is cooked, unquote. Now, the news has since gone viral on social media, with many Malaysian Hindus pointing out that Ponggol is not a celebration for Hindu worshippers. Instead, it is a celebration for a bountiful harvest and prosperity to come. So Ponggol, according to them, has nothing to do with religion. And now we've also heard the responses from the various ministries and from JAKIM. So Sharaad, what have they said?
Well, let's look at each of them in turn. We have the Ministry of Education, which has said essentially they put out the circular to allay the concerns, possible concerns, or potential concerns of Muslim parents about how to approach this particular festival if it's held in a school. Also, we had Mujahid Rawal, of course, he's the Minister of Religion, who's come out to say that the problem essentially, because this was an attempt to prevent a controversy, that this has been a failure of communication. Now, going back to JAKIM, very interesting, because JAKIM has said that it's not essentially responsible. This is a Ministry of Education issue, but they provided the kind of theological underpinnings for the circular, in the sense that they made the argumentation, or rather the argument, that this is a religious, not a cultural festival, and pointed to particular elements that they were concerned about.
Yeah. I was more interested in the Education Ministry's response, and acknowledging that there was such a circular, but insisted that it's not prohibiting schools from celebrating the Ponggol festival. Now, what's also interesting about this is, as you mentioned, Sharaad, the circular was kind of preemptive in a way. So according to the Education Ministry, they wanted to allay concerns of Muslim parents concerned about their children participating in such festivities. Now, this was even before anything happened, and I'm just wondering whether in their attempt to preempt the backlash, they then in fact caused the controversy.
Yeah, that may be true. I mean, I think it's good that you know, government officials are concerned about the optics of anything that happens and want to do the right thing, allaying concerns, directing people, guiding them as to how to deal with what many of us grew up in different times where these weren't really big issues, and we were in fact often taught by our parents or people in our community about how to deal with others with different cultures or different religious practices. I mean, now it's become almost the government's responsibility, I think, which is an issue of concern. Why has it become the government's responsibility to deal with these particular issues?
And I think also lately there's been this distinction that needs to be made. Everyone has to kind of draw clear lines as to what is cultural practice, what is religious practice, and I feel that we use the cultural to kind of avoid stepping on other religious toes, when in fact sometimes the lines are very, very blurred.
Yeah, they are. And you know, Melissa, one very easy way that people use, a kind of common sense way of making a distinction between what is religious and what is cultural, is to look at the way different communities within, say, a subset. Like, so I come from the Malayali community, right? So it's an ethno-linguistic group, very small in Malaysia. Now, they have a harvest festival called Onam, and it's celebrated by everybody within that community who speaks that language, regardless of religious affiliation. But we all know that cultural practice and religious practice, or religious practices could be deeply cultural, and cultural practices might take a borrow from religious iconography or symbolism and iconography, and therefore, you know, those lines are in fact blurred.
Yeah. All right. Well, in other news relating to the Education Ministry, it is now surveying schools to find out how many students are wearing black shoes and socks. Now, this is all part of an assessment of the policy a year after it was introduced back in 2019. So, all primary and secondary schools have been given until January 22nd to find out the number of students who wear white or black shoes. So the Education Ministry has had to come out to clarify rumours on social media about the government possibly considering switching back to white shoes. Now, this is not the case. I want to underscore that. This is not the case. In fact, the misunderstanding arose after the Friends of Mazli Malik Facebook shared an Education Ministry circular that claimed there would be a quote-unquote review of the black shoe policy in schools.
Well, Melissa, you know, policies ought to be reviewed,
Yes.
their effectiveness tested against the realities of the actual implementation and so on and so forth. That's always a good thing. But why we have come to spend so much time on black shoes, and you know what we've learned recently is a rather peripheral initiative by Mazli Malik when he was Education Minister, is I think something that is a deep concern. Now, is the media driving this? Is the media, in fact, and I'm not talking about the social media, I'm talking about the mainstream media, in fact, driving the agenda and preventing us from looking at real serious issues within the Ministry of Education in terms of policy, rather than these hot-button clickbait type of stories?
Well, okay, I can see where you're coming from, Sharaad, because there's been a lot of man-hours spent on discussing black shoes and socks, yes? But this is symptomatic of the trust deficit when it comes to U-turns in policy. So I think when people read this, and the media feels the need to report this, wondering whether a year after such a policy has been announced, will the government then U-turn in its implementation? And this is, of course, coming after Dr. Mazli Malik has resigned from office and Dr. Mahathir is now acting Education Minister. The key question is, will there be a review of Mazli's policies, or will there be continuity in what we're seeing right now?
Yeah, but don't think that the Black Shoe initiative during his term as minister was actually the thing that we should focus on.
Exactly.
But never mind.
Good point.
That's what I mean, it's not wrong for the media to, in fact, point this out.
All right.
Just the inordinate amount of time that we spend on it.
Well, the Prime Minister's communication advisor, Kadir Jassin, has called on the government to reconsider its accommodating stance towards Indian expatriates and workers, as well as products from India. Now, this follows unconfirmed reports that India was imposing restrictions on Malaysian refined palm oil. Is this all going to lead to an escalation of tensions with India, Sharaad?
Well, there are already tense relations between the two countries. The question is whether Kadir Jassin wants to see more tension rather than less. And this initiative clearly is an attempt to escalate the tensions between the two countries. The question is why, and at whose behest is Kadir Jassin doing this or making these suggestions? Now, if you read the article, the report, with Kadir Jassin, it says that for hundreds of years, and you know, that we, and he uses we, been accommodating people from India. It's a curious one because as far as I know, the Pakistan government is only not even 2 years old. Barisan National post-independence government, so not 60 years or so. Not quite sure what he means by these hundreds of years of accommodation, if they include the colonial period.
Right.
So,
Okay. Well, what then about those restrictions? Those unconfirmed reports about the restrictions to refined palm oil.
Yeah. So part of the problem seems to be there's some jumpiness about relations between the two countries. So when India announced that it wasn't going to be exporting onions, it was taken as a retaliation against Malaysia. What we do know that India has laws regarding the supply of onions. If there are not enough in India, they just don't export anymore. Right. So that wasn't in fact confirmed. Teresa Koch, as a Minister of Primary Industries, has come out to say that there is no ban. What India has done is it's placed refined palm oil under the restricted category, but it doesn't, in fact, specifically mention Malaysia.
Right.
So the question is, why does Kadir Jassin want to push the government towards retaliation and against 150,000 or so people from the subcontinent who are working here? Does he mean barbers? Does he mean IT workers, many of whom run the multimedia super corridor?
Right.
I mean, I'm actually quite astounded that this has come out from somebody so close to the government of the day.
It's a question of our diplomatic relations with India, definitely. I mean, do we want to pick a fight with an economy that big, especially since we are so export reliant? It's in our best interest, of course, to keep friendly ties with all our trading partners. Okay, after this, we're gonna take a quick break, and after this, we're gonna take a look at that controversial Sabah temporary pass that's coming up next on Consider This. Stay tuned.